There is one person a narcissist will never fully let go of, not because they love them, because that person did something almost no one else has ever managed to do to them. Intrigued. Most people walk into this topic assuming narcissists simply cannot bond with anyone in a real way, and that assumption is exactly what makes the core hook so effective. The common belief is that a narcissist treats every relationship as interchangeable, cycling through partners, friends, and family members with the same detached ease, discarding each one the moment they stop supplying value. Thoughtful. That belief isn't wrong for the vast majority of people who pass through a narcissist's life. But it creates a blind spot because it treats the pattern as absolute rather than as a rule, with a single, deeply consistent exception. The hook works by exploiting that gap between what people assume and what actually happens. Viewers already carry the belief that narcissists discard everyone eventually, so introducing the idea that one person somehow escapes that fate creates immediate cognitive tension. It forces a question the viewer didn't know they had. If narcissists can't really attach, then what is different about this one person? And could I have been that person? Or could someone I know still be trapped in that role right now? This is why the hook needs to be framed as a reveal, rather than a simple statement of fact. It isn't just informing the viewer that an exception exists, it's promising an explanation for a pattern many viewers have already lived through and never understood. Someone who dated a narcissist and watched them discard others while still occasionally circling back to them will feel an immediate personal pull toward this framing because it validates something they sensed but couldn't articulate. The strength of this hook comes from taking a widely accepted belief and showing that it's almost entirely true, except for one narrow, specific, and emotionally loaded case, which is far more compelling than either confirming or completely reversing what people already think. The central claim of this video rests on a distinction that most relationship content glosses over, which is the difference between an inability to attach and a narrow, selective capacity to attach. Popular psychology tends to flatten narcissism into a single idea that these individuals are simply incapable of love or genuine connection. And while that framing is useful for warning people away from harmful dynamics, it isn't fully accurate. What actually happens is more specific and more unsettling. A narcissist's typical relationships function almost transactionally, built around a steady supply of admiration, attention, or usefulness. The moment that supply dries up, or the moment someone stops reinforcing the narcissist's self-image, the relationship loses its purpose and gets phased out, sometimes abruptly and sometimes through a slow, cold withdrawal. This happens repeatedly and predictably across most of the people who pass through their life. But this claim asserts that one person consistently escapes that cycle, not because the narcissist suddenly develops empathy or emotional depth for them specifically, but because that person occupies a different psychological function entirely. Instead of being another source of supply to be drained and discarded, this person becomes something closer to a fixed reference point, an emotional anchor the narcissist keeps returning to regardless of how much time passes or how many other relationships come and go around them. This is a crucial distinction for the video to draw clearly because it reframes what looks like an inconsistency in narcissistic behavior into a consistent, almost rule-bound pattern. The claim also implies something important about how attachment forms differently in narcissistic personality patterns. Rather than depth of attachment growing through vulnerability, trust, and reciprocity the way it typically does in healthy relationships, this singular bond appears to form around whether someone triggers a specific, often unconscious response in the narcissist. That response isn't really about who the person is on the surface. It's about what role they occupy in relation to the narcissist's internal emotional regulation. This is what makes the claim compelling rather than just another generic narcissism fact. It doesn't ask viewers to believe narcissists secretly have hidden depths of love for one lucky person. It asks them to consider that even within a pattern of using and discarding others, there's a narrow exception carved out by something specific and identifiable, something that can be explained rather than left as a mystery. The psychological grounding for this bond traces back to object constancy, a concept that describes the ability to hold a stable, consistent emotional image of another person even when they're absent, imperfect, or emotionally distant in the moment. Most people develop this capacity early in childhood through consistent, secure caregiving, which allows them to trust that a relationship remains intact even during conflict or separation. Many narcissists, however, develop this capacity unevenly or incompletely, often because their early environment involved caregivers who were inconsistent, either excessively critical, excessively idealizing, or emotionally unavailable in ways that made trust conditional rather than stable. This inconsistency can leave a lasting imprint on how they relate to others as adults, where most people in their life remain replaceable because no one else ever fully proved they could be trusted to stay emotionally steady. The rare person who breaks this pattern typically does so by accidentally supplying something close to what object constancy would have offered in a healthier developmental process. They become a kind of emotional fixed point, someone who doesn't disappear when the narcissist is difficult, doesn't retaliate when mistreated, and doesn't require constant reassurance or performance to remain present. This creates an unusual psychological experience for the narcissist, one where a person continues to exist reliably in their internal world without needing to be managed, appeased, or impressed. This also connects to early attachment wounds in a more specific way. If a narcissist's original caregiver relationship involved a push and pull between idealization and criticism, then adult relationships that recreate a similar emotional shape can activate old, deeply wired responses. The rare person doesn't need to consciously resemble a parent or an earlier figure. What matters is the emotional pattern they represent, whether that's unconditional steadiness, a mirror that reflects an idealized self without threat, or a presence that neither overreacts nor abandons. When someone unknowingly matches that internal blueprint, the narcissist's usual defenses don't fully activate the same way they do with everyone else. This is why the bond can feel involuntary rather than chosen. The narcissist isn't consciously selecting this person as special through reasoning or preference. Something underneath conscious awareness recognizes a match to an old, unresolved emotional pattern, and that recognition creates a pull that other relationships never generate. It explains why narcissists can seem completely unaffected by losing most people in their life, yet remain quietly fixated on this one person for years, long after the relationship has technically ended, resurfacing unexpectedly, checking in without explanation, or reacting with unusual intensity if that person expresses genuine distance. The rare person profile matters because it moves this entire topic away from vague mysticism and into something identifiable, something viewers can actually measure themselves or someone they know against. What makes this person different isn't charisma, attractiveness, or even emotional intelligence in the conventional sense. It's a very specific combination of qualities that most people simply don't carry into a relationship with a narcissist because most people either get pulled into excessive admiration or pushed into eventual resentment. The rare person avoids both of those extremes, and that avoidance is what makes them stand out. The first defining trait is unconditional stability, meaning this person's emotional presence doesn't fluctuate based on how the narcissist behaves toward them. They don't escalate during conflict, they don't withdraw in retaliation, and they don't collapse into anxious pursuit when the narcissist becomes distant. This steadiness is rare because most people naturally react to inconsistency with inconsistency of their own, either chasing harder when someone pulls away or shutting down completely. The rare person's nervous system simply doesn't destabilize the same way, which makes them feel, to the narcissist, like solid ground in an otherwise unpredictable emotional landscape. The second defining trait is total non-reactivity, which is different from stability in an important way. Non-reactivity means this person doesn't feed the narcissist's need for emotional intensity, whether that intensity comes in the form of conflict, jealousy, or dramatic reconciliation. Many relationships with narcissists run on a cycle of tension and release, arguments followed by intense reconnection, which keeps both people locked into a chaotic rhythm. The rare person refuses to participate in that cycle, which paradoxically makes them more compelling rather than less, because they represent an escape from the exhausting emotional loop the narcissist unconsciously creates with almost everyone else. The third defining trait is functioning as an idealized mirror without becoming a threat. This means the rare person somehow reflects back a version of the narcissist that feels admirable or acceptable without ever exposing or confronting the insecurities underneath. They don't compete, they don't criticize in ways that feel like an attack on identity, and they don't demand vulnerability the narcissist isn't equipped to offer. At the same time, they don't inflate the narcissist's ego through excessive praise, which would eventually become predictable and lose its effect. Together, these three traits create a rare psychological profile. Someone who is present without being needy, calm without being passive, and reflective without being dangerous. This is precisely why so few people occupy this role, and why the ones who do often don't realize the position they hold until much later. Sometimes only after trying to leave and discovering how difficult that turns out to be. This point matters because the entire video only becomes meaningful if viewers can locate themselves inside it. And the concept of being someone's rare person does exactly that in a way most narcissism content never manages to do. Most videos on this subject speak in generalities, describing traits and behaviors from a safe emotional distance, which keeps viewers informed but rarely implicated. This particular idea works differently because it doesn't just describe a pattern. It asks a direct personal question. It forces the viewer to wonder whether they themselves occupied this unusual role in someone else's life, and that question tends to surface with real emotional weight for anyone who has already lived through a relationship with a narcissist. For someone who has experienced this firsthand, there's often a lingering confusion that never fully resolves. They may have watched a narcissist discard friends, partners, or family members without hesitation, while somehow remaining strangely fixated on them specifically, resurfacing unexpectedly, reaching out after long silences, or reacting with unusual intensity if they tried to create distance. Without a framework to explain this, that experience just feels confusing, almost like evidence that they mattered more, or alternatively, evidence that something was deeply wrong with the relationship that they could never quite name. This video offers language for that confusion, which is inherently validating because it replaces an unresolved personal mystery with a pattern that has a psychological explanation behind it. This is also where the video needs to draw an important distinction, treating this identification as information rather than flattery. Being the rare person isn't necessarily a compliment, and it isn't proof of being especially lovable or exceptional in a way that should feel good. It's simply a description of a specific emotional role, one that can just as easily be a trap as it can be meaningful. Someone who recognizes themselves in this pattern needs to understand that occupying this position often means absorbing more inconsistency, more emotional unpredictability, and more long-term entanglement than anyone else in the narcissist's life, precisely because they never fully get released the way others do. This dual purpose is what makes the point so effective for the video structure. It gives viewers a personal stake in continuing to watch because they want to know whether the description fits their own experience while also setting up a natural transition toward caution rather than celebration. It isn't simply telling people they were special, it's preparing them to evaluate whether that role served them or whether it quietly cost them more than they ever realized, and it accomplishes this without ever attaching a specific diagnosis to any one person watching. This point is about pacing, not content, and it exists because even a strong hook and a compelling claim can lose momentum if the video doesn't structure how information gets revealed. The mid-video reveal functions as a second wave of tension, positioned deliberately after the opening hook has already done its job but before viewer attention naturally starts to drift. Most retention drop-off on long-form psychology content happens somewhere in the middle, once the initial curiosity from the hook has been satisfied but before a new reason to keep watching has been introduced. This point exists specifically to prevent that drop-off from happening. The strategy here isn't to explain the full mechanism behind the bond immediately after introducing the concept. It's to tease the explanation first, letting the viewer sit with partial information long enough to generate their own anticipation. This works because human attention responds strongly to open loops, meaning once someone is told there's a specific reason why this bond forms, and that reason is coming, they become psychologically invested in reaching that answer, even if the surrounding content slows down slightly to build toward it. The goal is to withhold just enough detail that the explanation feels earned rather than immediately handed over. This also ties directly back into why the bond is described as different from every other relationship the narcissist has. That distinction needs to be planted early and then deliberately expanded rather than fully resolved in one sentence. If the difference between this relationship and every other discarded relationship were explained all at once near the beginning, the video would lose its central reason for someone to keep watching past the first minute. Instead, the difference gets introduced as a mystery, reinforced through emotional and psychological context, and only fully unpacked once enough foundation has been built for the explanation to actually land. This structural choice also mirrors how the underlying psychological content works, which strengthens the video rather than just serving as a retention trick layered on top. Object constancy, early attachment wounds, and the specific traits of the rare person all build on each other. Explaining them out of order or all at once would flatten the emotional impact and make the reveal feel rushed rather than satisfying. By sequencing the mid-video reveal carefully, the video allows viewers to experience a growing sense of recognition, especially if they've lived through something similar, rather than simply receiving a list of facts. This is why retention structure and emotional structure aren't separate concerns in this kind of content. The pacing exists to protect the viewer's curiosity long enough for the psychological explanation to feel like a genuine discovery rather than an early answer that gets forgotten before the video even reaches its point. This point exists because the audience most likely to watch a video like this isn't approaching it from pure curiosity about psychology in the abstract. Many viewers arrive already carrying the residue of a real relationship with someone who showed narcissistic patterns. And they aren't just looking for information, they're looking for something closer to explanation and relief. That distinction matters enormously for how the script should be written, because content aimed at satisfying curiosity reads very differently from content aimed at speaking to someone still working through confusion or unresolved emotional pain. For someone who lived through this kind of relationship, there's often a specific lingering question that never gets a clean answer. Something like, why did they keep coming back to me? Or why did I matter differently than everyone else they discarded? Or why can't I fully let go even after everything that happened? These aren't abstract questions, they're personal and often quietly painful, and most psychology content skips past them in favor of general trait lists or checklist-style descriptions of narcissistic behavior. This video works because it goes toward that specific ache instead of avoiding it, offering language for an experience that many viewers have never been able to fully articulate to themselves, let alone to anyone else. This is also why the script needs to walk a careful line, engaging that emotional need without slipping into diagnosing any specific person the viewer might be thinking about, including themselves or someone they were involved with. The goal isn't to tell someone definitively that their ex was a narcissist or that they were the rare person in someone's life. It's to describe a pattern clearly enough that viewers can recognize it if it applies, while leaving enough room that the content doesn't feel like it's making assumptions about their exact situation. This balance is part of what makes the video feel emotionally intelligent rather than exploitative, even though it's speaking directly to real pain. There's also a validating function built into this approach that shouldn't be underestimated. Many people who've been in relationships like this spend a long time being told, sometimes by others and sometimes by their own internal doubt, that they're overanalyzing things or imagining significance that wasn't really there. Watching a video that names a specific, consistent pattern, one that explains behavior they witnessed firsthand, offers a kind of quiet relief, the sense that their confusion had a real cause rather than being a personal failure to understand or let go. This is why the emotional pull isn't a side effect of the topic. It's the actual engine driving why someone keeps watching until the end, subscribes for more, or comments to share their own experience. Because the video isn't just teaching a concept. It's speaking directly to something many viewers have carried quietly for a long time without ever hearing it named clearly. The mid-video call to action works differently from a generic subscribe now prompt because it's built directly into the emotional momentum the video has already created, rather than interrupting it. By the time this moment arrives, the viewer has been walked through a hook that challenged their assumptions, a claim that reframed something confusing they may have personally experienced, and psychological grounding that gave that confusion a real explanation. Asking for a subscribe or a comment at this exact point works because the viewer isn't being asked to engage with something new, They're being asked to continue engaging with something they're already emotionally invested in. The specific framing matters here too. Rather than a generic request, the call to action ties directly back into the core question the video has been building toward, inviting viewers to recognize themselves in the rare person role and share that recognition. This turns the comment section into an extension of the video's emotional function rather than a separate, disconnected request. When someone comments that they think they were that person, or that this explained a relationship they never understood, they're not just engaging with content, they're processing something personal in a public space that reinforces their own reflection while also encouraging other viewers to do the same thing. This has a compounding effect on watch time and interaction that pure entertainment content doesn't typically generate as easily. Comments that share personal recognition tend to attract replies from other viewers who relate to the same experience, creating threads of discussion that extend far beyond the original video. This kind of engagement signals strongly to the platform that the content is generating meaningful interaction, which tends to support broader distribution, while also creating a community-like effect around the channel that keeps people returning for future videos on similar themes. The placement in the middle of the video, rather than only at the beginning or end, is deliberate as well. A CTA at the very start feels premature, asking for commitment before the viewer has any real reason to feel emotionally invested. A CTA saved only for the end risks being missed by viewers who drop off before finishing, which is common on longer psychology content. Placing it in the middle, right after the emotional and psychological foundation has been laid, but before the deeper payoff arrives, captures viewers at the exact point where curiosity and personal relevance are both at their highest. So if you've made it this far, you already understand something most people never will. A narcissist's inability to bond with anyone isn't actually the full story. It's a rule with exactly one exception. And that exception isn't chosen through love, the way most of us understand it. It's triggered by something older, something automatic, something the narcissists themselves probably couldn't explain if you asked them directly. Being that person doesn't mean you were the most important thing in their life in any healthy sense. It means you accidentally became the one stable point in a world that otherwise runs on performance, admiration, and constant replacement. You didn't chase, you didn't collapse, you didn't feed the chaos the way everyone else eventually did. And because of that, some part of them kept reaching back toward you long after everyone else had been discarded and forgotten. But here's what matters more than understanding why it happened. If you recognize yourself in this, the real question isn't whether you were special enough to be chosen. It's whether holding that role ever actually served you. Being the fixed point in someone else's unstable world often means absorbing the inconsistency, the disappearances, the sudden returns, the confusion, while they never had to change at all. Understanding the pattern doesn't mean you're obligated to keep playing your part in it. You don't have to keep being someone's anchor if it's costing you your own peace. Recognizing why they held on to you is not the same as deciding you have to let them keep holding on. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with this knowledge isn't using it to understand them better. It's using it to finally understand yourself and to choose differently going forward. If this explained something you've been carrying for a long time. You're not alone in that, and you're not imagining what you experienced. Let that be enough. Let it be the thing that finally gives you permission to stop waiting for something that was never really about love in the first place.